Now let's go back to Dubai because the world's biggest expo is happening there right now, the Dubai World Expo 2020. And there is just so much to talk about that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. So let's bring in our Dubai-based correspondent, Bastian Bori. Bastian, thank you so much for joining us. Now, the expo is estimated to get around 25 million people through the doors over the course of the next 6 months, but in the middle of a pandemic, this seems like a bit of a stretch. How is the crowd holding up so far?
Well, actually, Sarah, the first thing that comes to your mind when you visit this expo is the number of visitors. Despite the heat, 45 degrees with almost no shade at this time of the year in Dubai, despite the sanitary restrictions in force too, let's not forget that a new PCR test is requested every time, every day to every visitor, even if you have a multi-day ticket. And finally, despite the size of the expo, you have to walk about 45 minutes to cross the whole site. So who are these visitors? Well, many of them are foreigners. Some of them are investors. You can hear Chinese, French, Russians, Italians, English. Some of those are on vacation and, really wanted to visit this exhibition because they just heard about it. And some others literally came to the Emirates for the exhibition. I'm thinking, for example, of this Israeli couple I spoke to who told me they wanted to come and see by themselves how the Israelis were welcomed, how the Israeli pavilion was also welcomed. And I have to say that it's a warm welcome for them as much as for everybody else, actually, because when you approach people, when you go to meetings as a journalist, well, you realize that connections are made and that new cooperations are launched and that overall business is just genuinely working.
Well, that's fantastic. It's the first time as well that an expo, the World Expo, has been held in the Middle East. So tell us a bit about what the pavilions are like in this region. We have spoken at length about the Israel pavilion, but tell us what the countries are like around us.
It's an interesting topic because there are some Middle East pavilions that might never have seen the light of day, Sarah. And I'm thinking, for example, of the pavilion of Syria. The country has been torn by war for more than 10 years. It was previously a big textile producer with important oil resources, big tourism sector too, a big part of their GDP. And 10 years after, well, Syria didn't even have enough money to be there at the expo. And at the very last moment, the director of the pavilion, who I spoke to, found the necessary funds to build an exhibition based on visual arts, which is obviously an important sector. But unfortunately, that there's nothing else in this pavilion, nothing on developments, nothing on new technologies. And I would say, for instance, as a matter of comparison, that Armenia is doing better. It's not really the Middle East, but the country is often linked to issues that agitate the Middle East. The country went through war last year against Azerbaijan, left more than 6,000 dead in a few weeks, followed by capitulation. Well, today, the Armenians continue to sell their IT solutions. And if you compare with Afghanistan, for instance, the situation is much more difficult for them. The Afghans wanted to put forward their mining resources, their business sense, and the pavilion was ready, Sarah. But in the meantime, the Taliban seized power and did not take up the torch, which means the pavilion is closed and
Wow.
Afghanistan has nothing to offer and no money to make.
Wow, that's just incredible. Another region that has also been plagued by war, among other things, is Africa. And Africa has a significant presence there at the moment this year. So how are the African countries presenting themselves?
It's another thing that struck me in a good way, of course. It's the first time in the history of World Expo that all the African countries are there without exception, including war-torn or unstable countries like Somalia, including the least developed ones like Niger, and all of them are trying to bring and to sell their vision of the developments. I was able to visit the pavilions of Congo, Mozambique, Morocco, and there's a lot of emphasis on three things, I would say. First, a digitalization of the economy. This is something that obviously already existed, but it took on even more meaning during the COVID-19 pandemic. Two, sustainable agriculture. This is a problem that do concern many African and also Middle Eastern countries, such as Israel, such as the Emirates. And three, a more equitable development. As you know, Africa is the least developed continent despite its many natural resources. A very good example of the success of this expo. Let's talk in concrete terms. After only 4 days of this event, Uganda has already signed contracts for $650 million in renewable energy, transport, agriculture, medical equipment, etc. And you have this whole range of Chinese, Emirati companies that are in the front line to invest and to allow this country, like others, to recover more easily from the economic crisis related to the pandemic.